Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 234, Just Waiting on a Friend. The episode begins with Ash and the gang walking along the road on the way to Mahogany Town when a fog starts to develop around them, making them lost, and it gets progressively heavier. Despite this, Ash was confident that they could continue on in the fog, and trudged onwards, telling everyone that the fog was no big deal, and instructing them to follow him. However, he soon realized he couldn't see shit, and screamed as he tripped and fell down a slope. Ash quickly assured everyone he was okay though, but Brock wanted to make sure of this, warning Ash that he should have been more careful as to not slip, when, ironically, when he tries to go down the slope, he ends up falling down as well. As a result, Brock momentarily blacked out, but he was soon able to regain consciousness, although he was still dazed. As he laid there injured, still unable to get up, he was then approached by a girl who came out of the fog, accompanied by a Ninetales, and the girl was dressed in a kimono, and immediately concerningly asked if Brock was okay, seeing him on the ground. Due to being energized by seeing a beautiful woman, Brock was able to get back up super fast and introduce himself, assuring that he was okay. He then asked for her name, calling her the Vision of Beauty, believing that the fall may have made him hallucinate, but he was delighted to find out that he apparently wasn't hallucinating, as the girl responded back that her name was Lococo. As Brock stared at her lovingly, like he did with any girl, Ash and Misty, with Ash having now managed to climb back up the ledge that he fell down, were more intrigued with her Ninetales, and Ash used his Pokedex to learn more information on it. Then, Lococo warns that the fog could get even worse out in the area, as it tended to, so insists that Ash and the gang should come by her house to wait out the fog. Although Ash and Misty were somewhat intimidated by the Ninetales, Brock instantly accepted, due to having a massive crush on the girl obviously, so Ash and Misty decided to follow, not wanting to become separated from Brock. Meanwhile, Team Rocket had also been wandering through the fog, and had fallen down a ledge as well, since they were so hungry that they couldn't even focus on walking. As they wondered where they were going to get their next meal, Wobbuffet forcibly popped out of its Pokeball, leading Jessie to go and try and recall him. However, Wobbuffet had already climbed up over the ledge, so this led Jessie to look over the ledge as well, and she soon spotted Ash and the gang, leading James and Meowth to join her at the top of the ledge, and they spotted them as well. Meowth then notices Lococo and Ninetales with them, and suggests that Team Rocket should capture both Pikachu and Ninetales, and follow Ash and the gang to wherever they were going. James and Jessie initially agree, although the three of them then stopped in their tracks as they went to follow, as they realized that they were still too tired and hungry, and decided that they should probably find something to eat first. Meanwhile, as Ash and the gang are walking with Lococo to her place, they suddenly stop in seemingly the middle of nowhere, and Ash questions where the fuck her house was and why they stopped. Suddenly, a big red door appears out of nowhere, which then reveals a castle once it opens up. Lococo clarifies that this was her castle, and leads Ash and the gang inside. Ash was a little hesitant due to the place disappearing out of nowhere, and he feared that Lococo could have been up to something sinister, but when Lococo offered to take them to her dining room for a snack, Ash instantly removed his doubts, even when he heard a strange sound when the door closed behind him when he walked in, as he just ignored it, too hungry to think. He did question what it was briefly, but that was about it. What was the sound, you may ask? Well, it was Team Rocket, as Meowth and James were struggling to hold Jessie up as they stood against a pillar, having just entered the castle area. They had initially just wanted to waltz in to the castle, but when they noticed that Ash and the gang were entering as well, they immediately tried to hide behind the pillar, and James and Meowth could barely hold Jessie up, so that was the source of the noise, their screams basically. Jessie ordered James and Meowth to be quiet, reminding them that they had came to the castle to both find some food and also steal Pikachu and Ninetales. They decided to kill two birds with one stone. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, they had made it into the dining room, and Lococo gave them a platter of fruit, which they happily began eating, when suddenly, Lococo's Ninetales seemed to take a liking to Brock, as it showed its affection by sitting on Brock's lap. And Brock reciprocated the affection, petting her, as he obviously liked Ninetales, since he had a Vulpix before, and he missed his Vulpix. Meanwhile, Team Rocket had snuck into the actual castle now, and they were looking for both food and Ash and the gang, examining several rooms, and when they opened up one door, they found one of their desires, food, being an entire stash of cookies, and they immediately started chowing down, as it was going to take them a long-ass time to get through all these cookies. I mean, look at this image here, look at this, look at how many goddamn cookies there are. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang thanked Lococo for all of the fruit, with Brock giving Lococo an extra special thanks as he began to flirt with her. Much to Misty's surprise, Lococo didn't immediately reject Brock, and instead was flirting back with him. What Brock and Misty didn't know, though, was Lococo wasn't really flirting back because she liked Brock. She was flirting back because she saw that her Ninetales liked Brock, and this was important to her. This was so important to her that she requested that Brock stay over, reasoning that the fog was still pretty fucking bad, so it would probably be best for Brock and Ash and the gang and all them to stay over for the night. Brock had been wanting to ask that question himself, but he was just too nervous, so he obviously accepted the offer. This led Lococo to go with her Ninetales to go prepare all the guest rooms for Ash and the gang to stay in. Ash and the gang admired the Ninetales as it and Lococo left, but as for Misty's Togepi, it wasn't looking at the Ninetales. It was too busy looking at the mirror in the corner, and it immediately alerted Misty to something suspicious about the mirror, leading Misty to direct her attention to it, and notice that as Ninetales and Lococo walked by the mirror, only Ninetales had a reflection in it. Lococo wasn't there. Misty was obviously confused and frightened by this, so she shouted this out aloud to alert both Ash, Brock, as well as Lococo. And Lococo simply responds by saying that mist must have got into her castle and therefore clouded up the mirror, and she proceeded to close the mirror's shutters so that Ash and the gang couldn't look at it anymore, using her psychic powers, although this just freaked out Ash and Misty even more, as they obviously weren't aware that Lococo had psychic powers, and they thought that the mirror's shutters just happened to shut out of nowhere, with no cause. Meanwhile, Team Rocket had realized that even they couldn't eat all the goddamn cookies, so they ordered Wobbuffet to pack some up for later, and they then continued to search, now for Ash and the gang, although they stumbled upon a hallway filled with popcorn, and decided that they were actually still hungry after all, as they began chowing down, remarking how strange this castle was, due to having food all over the place. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, with Lococo having left to prepare the rooms with Ninetales, Misty and Ash were still terrified, thinking that an invisible hand or some shit closed the shutters, and Misty tries to convince Brock to leave with her and Ash, reminding him of Lococo not appearing as a reflection. But Brock was too enamored by his crush on Lococo, stating his belief that Lococo was merely just too beautiful to be captured by the mirror's reflection, adding that the mirror's shutters likely closed themselves in frustration of this. So Misty proceeded to go up to the closed mirror and tried to open the shutters to show Brock that there really was no mist on the mirror, so Lococo should have shown up. However, Brock was too distracted, as Ninetales had returned, giving him affection, with Brock remarking that Ninetales must have liked him so much since he had a Vulpix before. Upon seeing the Ninetales, Misty panicked, as she realized that if Ninetales was back, Lococo would soon follow. And sure enough, she did, as she returned, stating that all the rooms were ready. Misty instantly wanted to let Lococo know of her suspicions of her, including her suspicions that Lococo may have been trying to do something dangerous to all of them, such as kill them, and she proceeded to ask Lococo why she was alone, believing that Lococo may have killed some previous guests. Brock gets offended on Lococo's behalf, believing that Misty was asking this question because she thought that Lococo had no other friends, and he instantly apologizes to Lococo on Misty's behalf for her rude question. However, Lococo answers Misty's question anyways, proceeding to tell the castle's story, explaining why her and Ninetales were alone. Essentially, the mansion was originally owned by a man who was also the original trainer of the Ninetales, but one day, the man left on a long journey, leaving behind his Ninetales, and hadn't returned, even to this day. He did leave behind several servants and other family members at the castle, but eventually, all of them departed on their own journeys as well, with the exception of Lococo, with the two of them having been waiting for the man, Ninetales' master, to return all this time, although he never had. Brock was immensely touched by this story, and scolded Misty for asking her in the first place, stating that she shouldn't have had to share something so sad and private. After Lococo saw how touched Brock was, she suggested that he stay in the castle with her permanently so that her and Ninetales wouldn't be lonely, and Brock, wanting to marry her, accepted, and asked nervously if she wanted to get married, with Lococo accepting Brock's offer and blushing, much to everyone's shock yet again. They were shocked that Lococo and Brock actually seemed to like each other, and that Brock was so willing to leave them. Brock was so overjoyed by Lococo accepting his marriage proposal that he began to get up and excitedly run towards her to hug her. Much to Ash and Misty's horror, though, Brock goes right through her body when he hugs her, indicating that she definitely wasn't a real person or a ghost of some sort. Misty and Ash pick Brock up, and they state that Lococo was likely not a real person in front of both Brock and her to try and convince Brock of this. However, Brock barely even heard what they said, as he was too in love with her now. He was essentially in a daze, and he just couldn't be convinced of anything bad regarding Lococo. This leads Misty to pull Brock and Ash for a private conversation away from Lococo so that she could try and knock some sense into Brock without Lococo's potential influence. Her and Ash confirm that they both saw Brock go through Lococo's body. They weren't hallucinating or some shit. Misty then tells Brock that because of this, the three of them had to get out immediately in fear of what Lococo was capable of. However, Brock got angry as he simply thought that, just like how Misty always dragged him off, she was trying to take away his lover now that he finally had one, so he refused to go, and stated that there was no way that Lococo wasn't a real person. He screamed so loud that Lococo was able to hear their private conversation, and as a result, she orders Brock outside to one of the guest rooms so that she could talk to Misty and Ash privately, and orders her Ninetales to escort him out, with both Ninetales and Brock happily obliging, much to Lococo's delight after seeing how Brock was so in love with her that he would basically do anything for her. After Brock left for the room and Ninetales returned, Lococo then took the opportunity to talk to Ash and Misty. She was angry at them for trying to coerce Brock into leaving, telling them that if they wanted to leave so badly, then they could go without Brock, as she orders her Ninetales to throw them out with a psychic power, which levitates both Ash and Misty off of the ground and throws them outside of the castle. As Ash and Misty were thrown outside, they immediately realized that there was something suspicious about that Ninetales too, not just Lococo, since Ninetales was supposed to only be a fire type, not a psychic type, and it was able to use psychic powers of some kind. As Lococo then finds Brock in one of the rooms and decides to take him outside to the porch, Team Rocket were still in that hallway eating popcorn when they went down the hallway some more and managed to find an entire room filled with popcorn as well, and they continued to eat. Damn, was that all they were going to do? This episode, not even steal any Pokemon? Back with Misty and Ash, they were trying to find a way back into the castle when they spotted Brock and Lococo on the porch, so they decided to hide in some nearby bushes to eavesdrop on their conversation. Brock was patting Ninetales, while Lococo was asking if he needed anything else. Brock remarked that this was the happiest he had ever been, finding a woman who actually liked him. He didn't need anything else. Just then, Lococo, unknowingly to Brock, used her psychic powers again to change Brock's clothes into a formal attire that also looked relatively traditional. When Ash saw this, he feared for Brock's safety, fearing what else Lococo could do to him aside from changing his clothes, and went to go battle Lococo and her Ninetales to try and stop them. But Misty stopped him, stating that they should instead sneak back into the castle while Lococo and Brock were outside on the porch, and try and find out some secrets about Lococo's true identity and how they were related to the castle's history. since she must not have been just a regular servant of the castle like she claimed. So, with that, they snuck back into the castle and begun exploring until they eventually found the castle's library. Misty figured that all the books in the library had to have some information on Lococo, but unfortunately they didn't, since a lot of them dealt with the very early history of the castle, dating back like 200 years. The most interesting thing that they found in the library was actually a door to another room, which Ash and Misty didn't know at the time belonged to the owner of the mansion, who had left on the journey. Immediately upon entering the room, they saw a desk, and hanging above the desk was a portrait of Brock. No, it was a doppelganger of Brock. The only difference in his body was that the doppelganger had a mole on his head. And he was wearing the same formal outfit that Lococo had just magically put on Brock. Ash and Misty knew that despite this looking exactly like Brock, it obviously couldn't have been him. And this was only further evidenced by the fact that the picture involved Brock, or this Brock doppelganger, petting the Ninetales, and Brock had never met Ninetales before this point, so it would have been impossible for it to actually be him. It was only further confirmed not to be Brock when Ash then spotted a diary on the desk, which was revealed to be from the owner of the mansion, making Ash and Misty realize that the person in the picture must have been the owner of the mansion. How did this diary confirm that Brock wasn't the one in the picture, you may ask? Well, it was because the last entry of the diary stated that the man left on a journey 200 years ago. So, Ash and Misty come to the conclusion that if Lococo was alive when the man originally left on his journey, and he hadn't come back for 200 years at this point, then Lococo had to have in fact been a ghost, since humans obviously couldn't live for 200 years. Ash and Misty are about to go outside to the porch to confront Brock and Lococo and warn Brock, but before they do, they then spot a second item on the desk, being an old Pokeball that had a weird design on it, and they come to the conclusion that this Pokeball must have been used to keep Ninetales inside, and it must have belonged to the owner. Without further ado, Ash and Misty then go out to warn Brock. However, Misty suggests that Ash make a plan first, scared of what Lococo and Ninetales were capable of, leading Ash to come up with the idea to battle the Ninetales with his Totodile, stating that Totodile should be able to do a lot of damage with its water attacks. Sure enough, when Ash and Misty approach Brock and Lococo, who were enjoying themselves on the porch, Ash instantly sends out his Totodile, and the water gun that he orders was about to do something to Ninetales, although Ninetales was able to dodge, and the water gun instead hit Lococo straight in the face, and it went right through her, proving that she was a ghost, and even Brock saw this time. This caused him to get confused, obviously, as it was revealed that Lococo had used her psychic powers to put Brock under a spell. So even though he initially did go with her because he loved her, Lococo had managed to keep Brock with her by putting him under a psychic spell with the help of Ninetales. The now back to normal Brock then got even more shocked as he noticed that not only did the water gun go through Lococo, Lococo was now disappearing, and Ash and Misty saw this as well as Lococo fully disappeared into thin air, leaving just the Ninetales, who had since tried to use a flamethrower on Totodile, but Totodile dodged and hit the Ninetales with a water gun. This weakened it, which was what actually caused Lococo to disappear, unbeknownst to Ash and the gang. Although they did suspect that the Ninetales was involved when they then noticed that the entire castle was beginning to disappear. And in its place, a decayed building took its place, revealing that the castle was nothing more than an illusion, and the true identity of the castle was a ruined building. The castle itself wasn't the only thing that was nothing but a mere illusion, but so were Brock's formal clothes, as Brock's clothes then reverted to normal, and also all of the food that Team Rocket had ate was nothing but an illusion as well, as Team Rocket were disgusted to find out that instead of a pile of popcorn, they were now eating a pile of leaves. Much to Team Rocket's dismay, they found out that the cookies that Wobbuffet had put in a backpack also turned into leaves as well. Ash and the gang then realized that Ninetales was the one who had created all of these illusions when they saw how angry the Ninetales was at the fact of its illusions being unveiled. Ash and the gang try to calm down Ninetales, but it doesn't listen as it goes to use Fire Spin on them. When the Fire Spin hit Totodile, it actually did a decent amount of damage for a fire attack, so Ash came to the conclusion that the best thing they could do against the Ninetales was run away, if even Totodile couldn't do much to it. So, Ash and the gang ran into the former mansion from the porch, and Ninetales chased after them. They tried to escape it, but they couldn't, as Ninetales eventually cornered them in the owner's library room that had his diary and his picture in it. Upon seeing the picture, Brock was obviously surprised at seeing a doppelganger, but Ash and Misty were surprised at still seeing the picture as well, as they expected it to disappear along with the rest of the castle. So, they came to the conclusion that even if seemingly everything was fake, the story about Ninetales with its owner must have been real to some extent. As for how Brock was taking the picture, he immediately thought that him and Ninetales may have had a connection somehow. But Ash and Misty explained what they had read in the owner's diary, and stated their assumption that Ninetales probably only cared for Brock because it thought that Brock was its owner, since they looked the same, adding that it was probably mad at Ash and Misty because they were trying to take Brock away from it. Ash then tries to convince the Ninetales that Brock wasn't its owner after all, but this just made the Ninetales angry, believing that Ash and Misty were simply trying to deceive it. And suddenly, Lococo appeared again and demanded that Ash and Misty leave Brock alone and let him stay at the place. This led Ash and the gang to realize that Lococo likely wasn't a ghost, but instead just an illusion created by Ninetales, so that it had a way to talk to humans. So, this in turn causes Ash and the gang to come to another conclusion that the story that quote-unquote Lococo told them was likely true to some extent, with the part about the owner leaving Ninetales being true, but the part about Lococo and several other servants being there likely not being true. Ninetales got pissed off that Ash and Misty weren't returning Brock to it, so it proceeded to use Flamethrower on Totodile, who was still out of its Pokeball, leading Ash to order Totodile to retaliate with Water Gun. However, before the Water Gun could make contact, Ninetales then used Psychic on Totodile to lift it up into the air, leading Ash to call it back. With Totodile down, Ash tried sending out his Pikachu to battle Ninetales, ordering it to use Thunderbolt, but Ninetales simply used Psychic again. As Ash tried to keep Pikachu down from the Psychic, he ended up getting levitated by the Psychic as well, meaning him and Pikachu were both up in the air, unable to do anything. Ninetales then took the opportunity to launch a Flamethrower at Ash and Pikachu, but in doing so, it lessened the power of the Psychic, since it wasn't currently using it, so Pikachu and Ash were able to take control of their bodies to some extent again, as they dodged out of the way, making the Flamethrower hit the roof. With Ash then back down on the ground with Pikachu, he tries again to talk to the Ninetales to prove that Brock wasn't its owner, but this just makes Ninetales even more angry as it gets ready to fire another Flamethrower. However, Brock then spotted the old Pokeball on the desk that Ash and Misty had just managed to explain belonged to the owner. So Brock decides to use Ninetales, thinking that it was its owner, to his advantage, as he commands Ninetales to return to the Pokeball. Sure enough, Ninetales, believing that Brock was its master, was very happy to be given orders from it again, so it happily jumped into the Pokeball. With Ninetales in the Pokeball, Ash and the gang were shocked to see Lococo appear, since they knew that she was just an illusion created by Ninetales. Lococo confirmed this, though stated that Ninetales was so powerful that she was able to appear on her own, independently of Ninetales, even though she was just an illusion. Brock was disappointed at the revelation of Lococo really just being an illusion, as he hoped that there was really a girl who liked him. Although, the Lococo illusion then thanked Brock, cheering him up a little bit, as she thanked him for returning Ninetales to its Pokeball, explaining that it had been wanting to go back for a very long time. However, she added that now that Ninetales was back in its Pokeball, it was now calm, and wanted to tell Brock, through Lococo, the true story behind the mansion and its master, stating that Ninetales had some things that it wanted to clarify with Ash and the gang. So, Brock, not wanting to anger the Ninetales again, decides to send it out so that it could tell the story through Lococo. So, with Ninetales out, it begins explaining. Just as Lococo had said before, the Ninetales master left on a journey 200 years ago, although added that he only took his things, leaving Ninetales, his friends, and his family behind, as well as stating that the master said he would be back in a month, although he never came back. The Ninetales and the master's family and all of his servants at the castle, since the wrecked building was actually a castle at that time, before time ravaged it, all waited patiently for the master to return, but as time went on, only Ninetales remained waiting, as all of his family and the servants had given up and decided to leave to go to do other things, as opposed to spending their whole life waiting. Each of the family members and servants tried to get Ninetales to come with them as they left, but Ninetales still thought that its master would return, so it stayed until eventually it remained on its own, being extremely dedicated to its master, as it remembered all the fun times they had playing and reading together. It was so dedicated that it stayed waiting, losing track of time, until eventually 100 years had passed, and the castle had now deteriorated, since with no one to look after Ninetales, it was forced to fend for itself and get food and apples for itself, and that was all it was focused on, not having time to focus on trying to repair the castle. Right after the 100-year mark, Ninetales had come to the conclusion that since its master was a human, it couldn't have been alive anymore, so it finally decided to give up on waiting and leave the nearly destroyed castle. However, when it tried to leave, but soon discovered that it had psychic powers that were somehow linked to this specially designed Pokeball, and as a result, the Pokeball emitted these psychic powers, spreading them onto Ninetales and preventing it from leaving the castle, since the psychic powers created a barrier that she couldn't get past. The Ninetales felt that the psychic powers coming from its Pokeball was a way of its master trying to tell it to stay at the castle and essentially forcing it to, so she decided to wait, hoping that her master was somehow still alive, or would perhaps even come back as a psychic ghost. After over 50 more years passed, with Ninetales bored, it had nothing else to do but practice its psychic powers, and was eventually able to develop them to such a high level that it was able to start creating illusions. It then decided to use these illusions, such as Lococo and the food, to lure any person who passed by into the castle, since it now had fully accepted that its master was dead, and wanted to find a new master. Ash and the gang were confused by this, as they thought that Ninetales still thought that its master was alive, since it thought that Brock was its master, but then Lococo/Ninetales clarified that it knew this whole time that Brock wasn't its master. It simply saw that Brock was a doppelganger of its master, so it thought that he would be the perfect replacement, having previously not seen all of the other people that it had lured into the castle as fit. So that's why it decided to lure Brock into the castle and tried to keep him there. Essentially, it wanted a new master. Ninetales then nudged up to Brock, apologizing for the confusion, though had Lococo clarify that Ninetales' story was now done, as Lococo then faded away. Ash and the gang were obviously immensely shocked by this long story, so they were caught very much off guard when Team Rocket showed up in their Meowth balloon, having left the room that formerly had all the popcorn and the cookies, instead just having leaves, of course, and immediately shot down a net from their Meowth balloon to capture Ninetales. Team Rocket then do their motto, explaining that they wanted to capture the Ninetales, not just so that they could give it to Giovanni, but as revenge for Ninetales having created an illusion of food, as now they were hungry as fuck because the food wasn't real, and they had instead just eaten leaves. Ash and the gang cut off their motto, though, questioning how the fuck Team Rocket even knew that Ninetales was psychic in the first place, leading Team Rocket to angrily clarify that they had been spying for the past couple minutes. Ash and the gang should have known this. Anyways, Team Rocket then finish their motto and begin to make their escape with the netted Ninetales as they send out Arbok and Victreebel to hold off Ash and the gang, although Victreebel, of course, ate James first. Anyways, before Arbok and Victreebel could do anything, Ash sent out his Bayleaf and had to use Razor Leaf to break the net holding Ninetales, setting Ninetales free. In an attempt to retrieve Ninetales, Jesse had Arbok use Poison Sting multiple times to hit the multiple targets. However, Ninetales uses its psychic powers to levitate the Poison Stings back at the Meowth balloon, popping it a little bit. James scolded Jessie for her failure, explaining that if Arbok just used Poison Sting again, the Ninetales would just send it back at them again, so he ordered Jessie to let him handle this, although Jessie retorted that his Victreebel couldn't do shit either, because it was still on his head. But just then, James threw Victreebel off of his head and down from the Meowth balloon to attack Ninetales. However, due to James's struggle to get Victreebel off of his head, he ended up missing Ninetales, instead heading directly for Brock. However, Ninetales, wanting to protect its wannabe new master, pushed Brock away before Victreebel could hit it, although the fall caused Ninetales' Pokeball, which was in Brock's pocket, to shatter to pieces, since it fell off. Then, Bayleaf steps in once again, using Tackle on both Victreebel and Arbok, knocking them back into the Meowth balloon. With Arbok and Victreebel both down, Ninetales and Pikachu took the opportunity to team up and use Flamethrower and Thunderbolt respectively, exploding Team Rocket's balloon and sending them blasting off. After this, the fog had disappeared, so Ash and the gang were ready to leave the castle. Ninetales wanted to go with Brock, still wanting him to be its new master, but then it realized that with the Pokeball, it was still trapped in the mansion, so it couldn't go with Ash and the gang. However, Brock then reminded Ninetales that its Pokeball was now broken, so the psychic barrier that the Pokeball had was also gone as well, meaning that Ninetales could leave the castle slash mansion. However, Brock clarified that even though Ninetales could leave, he still didn't want Ninetales to come with it, as he figured that Ninetales would do better fending for itself out in the wild, stating that he believed Ninetales was strong enough, especially with still having its psychic powers, even with the Pokeball being destroyed. Ninetales eventually agrees to go off on its own, as it leaves, with Ash and the gang saying goodbye to it, with Ninetales realizing that it didn't even need a master. It could be independent. However, before Ninetales left, it did one more thing, which was summon Lococo's illusion, and had Lococo thank Ash and the gang on its behalf for saving it from the psychic powers of the Pokeball. Lococo then disappeared as Ninetales walked into the distance, allowing Ash and the gang to continue on their journey.